Okay. Hello, everybody. I had to take an intermission from the first part of the talk, so this is part two. It is part two of. Wait a minute. How did I not change the title? Okay, there we go. The conscious evolutionary opportunity. I have to build up to what I was saying because I had to stop the previous one. But I shall begin like this. There was a story, a Zen story, where this guy is just standing around on the road back in the day in those Zen times, old school times. And suddenly the guy sees one wild horse run, okay? Like just he sees a wild horse come out of the forest just running, and the horse passes the road, passes the guy who's just standing there watching this. Suddenly, behind it, there comes a horse, but this time there's a guy on it, and the horse is just running super fast. And then the guy looks at the man who's just the spectator, he looks at the guy, and suddenly, as he passes, he says, "Where are you going, man? Why are you riding so fast?" And the guy says, "I don't know. Ask the horse." And so, the conscious evolutionary opportunities that evolution and the process of nature are like the horse. We are a sort of awareness in a natural movement of particles in empty space. We're not just particles in empty space because the space appears as consciousness. You see, the space, like you can say that your mind is a sort of container for various data that the free will chooses. Usually when the child is born, it's hit with waves of data. It's like literally like they're spoon feeding the child like baby food. And at the same time, the child's intelligence is recording behavior. These behaviors eventually, as certain patterns develop when there's repetition, when there's a cyclical sense to things. Just a second, guys. I'm trying to find the right tune. I'm listening to headphones as I'm talking right now. Okay. By the way, these live streams are open to viewer engagement, but authentic, serious viewer engagement. Um, anyways, the child begins being shaped by the data it is given. It begins working with this kind of pattern recognition system into programmed behavior. You see, when we enter society, we actually enter a program. we enter a program where we must abide by, where we are automatically seen as a member of that society. You see, it is kind of like some people say it's like a jungle out there, the concrete jungle, you know. And what that means is, in some sense, the external violence that we had in our savage livelihoods back in the day, in our evolutionary phases, from animal towards the civil animal, um, in some sense, that savageness has transformed into an internal savageness. So we are now, and it's constantly being polished and crystallized into a way where, in 2019, political correctness is simply trying to banish disruption. You see, a civilization cannot function with chaos and order. Chaos and order are the engines, they're the generators of the stories of people's lives. Without suffering, there's no truth to seek. Without death, there's no life to live. It's just so it would just be an eternal moment. For me, it's very fascinating. Some people feel eternity. The religion has done an incredible sort of marketing work in some sense. And I'm not saying this rudely, I just mean the idea that it gave across was the notion of heaven. So that means, regardless of whatever kind of suffering the person went through, at the back of his head, he's like, I'm going to a better place, you know, if I be good, you know. So it's kind of like the first step from change. So people, as life changes, they want to go somewhere better. Externally, we're in the world, but when we wonder at what happens after this world, there's the notion that there would be a continuity. Now, it's very fascinating because I have studied certain different religions to some degree, and what I have noticed is, like, one of the first questions was, what is the soul in the view of all these religions? And the second one is, what do they think happens after death? And I came into the conclusion that most religions, except like sort of Buddhism and Hinduism and kind of those, pretty much most religions, the soul is a secret and mystery of God. Okay, it is in some sense, in certain religious circles, wrong to speak about something that only the Creator knows. You see, but we can say that we have to apply our knowledge because it was given by the Creator. This would be the counter-religious argument, where we say, in the freedom, like, you see, you can't talk to a child in a, like, in a grown-up way all the time. You got to see what level of words the child uses and what words the child can understand, like a young child. And so you bring yourself down to that level of reality and walk in that being's world, in the child's world. Because the thing is, when a young child in its environment, too many things happen to it that it can't have control, it will externally feel, it would pretty much, what I like to call, it will develop an introverted pattern. The child would constantly put effort externally, but in the resistance and rejection of whatever, the child would then be like, oh, why am I trying? This is all like a sort of subconscious setting that I'm suggesting. So children need to feel that it's possible for them to advance. And it doesn't mean this advancement is going to be simple or easy. You know, it's not like you can try making life for a child super easy, but when that child grows up, it's going to see what the world's like. You can't lie to children because their eyes will open up to the world. They will transform. They will transform into a maturity where after we're all just people doing laps around the sun. You know, that means it's like, you know, we can say playfully that the person got into heaven. Like, imagine this is a story. The person got into heaven, and somebody who was in heaven asked him, "Hey man, how was Earth? You know, how was your ride? You know?" And the person in heaven says, "It's very strange because how can I be in heaven when those that I cared for are still in hell?" It's this notion that again, the yin yang symbol echoes in regards to a sort of universal balance. The mind, this conscious evolutionary opportunity is how, for the first time, the species can build itself, but has to understand it has come from nature, it will return to nature, and on the way, it can experience a sort of technological phenomena. That means there would be an incredible moral debate if in the future human beings, let's say they made this advanced computer and people could connect their consciousness and their consciousness could go live in this digital machine like forever. Okay, imagine. So when we think about that, we most people nowadays would be like, that's messed up. No, hell no, man. Fuck Terminator. Excuse my language, but like people would have that sort of response. But if you ask some of our ancestors, they might say, hey man, it's temporary. You're temporarily a manifest being. Okay? Now, as you are temporarily a manifest being, in this roller coaster ride, in some sense, nature's roller coaster ride is like from the moment eyes open to the moment they close. Okay. I feel like the fear of death can go away when the person actually understands the void. Much of civilization and society does not consider the void. Most people are afraid of it because the void it was only like the mystic was the only one who felt it could go near it. And even if the person did, it's kind of like this very complex kind of part of the mountain that only one person, like a few people, could. Nobody cared enough. Nobody felt there was a need. You see, this is the profoundness. Sometimes in these talks, at first I ran trying to say the stuff I knew. Then I realized I have to honor my ancestry, and my ancestry was not a certain DNA, even though objectively, yes, it's the design that my ancestors carried now lives through me. But I'm telling you, aside from this design, it's like their effort. And I understand the effort of the mind of my ancestor. It doesn't matter what kind of embodiment. It was just the effort, what human beings lived for, and it was the continuity of it. So it's very interesting. We are believing that we're temporary evolutionary creatures, but when we look at what evolution is, it seems to be this sort of eternal, endless effort to continue. So as if nature has an eternal attitude towards its temporary existence. This eternal attitude, it's like pass on in some sense. So it's a very unique psychological kind of perspective that comes to one when they wonder about how thoughts arise and who do they belong to, and you realize the owner of thought is not a thought, it is the attention. So the conscious evolutionary opportunity is very unique. On one level, the opportunity is like, okay, before many animals, even many things in nature, their will is not that as advanced as us. So our will has been freed, as if the willingness of animals is not freed yet. They're not, you can say they're not aware of their mortality. The lion doesn't kill like 20 gazelle and put it in this corner and like eat it later. The lion eats when it's hungry. That means it does not really consider the future until it has objective biological consequence. Okay, so in some sense, animals are their will is still chained. It's like when they spoke about titans in ancient mythology, this kind of great power, incredible power that was chained, and it was chained because it was blind. Because there's nothing worse than a powerful fool. The problem is the tolerance of that being. It's like most people in the Avengers were like, holy shit, is Hulk gonna punch us or the enemy? And so it's this kind of wonder about the intensity of experience shifting your existence. Because we have concluded we are chemical creatures, it's very fascinating for me. I was listening to Terence McKenna, and then I suddenly laughed. And of course, he's a person I incredibly honor his creative efforts in communicating his inner realities. But at the same time, I was like, you're bringing people to psychedelics, but you're concluding it's we are not objective beings. So you see, it's very fascinating. We have had an obsession with trying to make matter be more than matter. But this obsession will end once you see, like, the what I'm telling you is, this is why nobody can really teach enlightenment. It has to arise from your own inner authentic sort of revelatory search in this life. And it doesn't have to be meaningful. It could be simple. It's fascinating. People, they go seeking the ultimate and they reflect in different ways. What that means is one person runs to the mirror of existence and reflects towards a direction where it's as if, like, the life, simplicity is truth for them. They've lived such a complex life that just for life to be simple is like their intelligence has room to breathe. Okay, there's people who are opposite. The guy is simple. The guy has not had access, was not overloaded by data as a young age, so he eventually goes into the world of data through a more simple configured, you can say, identity, more natural configured identity, and then he wonders. So you see, it's very important. The ability of the individual honestly has to do with endurance. So what that means is, this is what I'm telling you. Whatever you want to learn, anything. Let's say right now you're somebody who wants to learn astrophysics, okay? Or you want to learn anything, okay? This is the approach that I find many have held in history. And it's this approach that you endlessly put your attention until you reach the ultimate. It's this sort of unending attitude that you are constantly learning from the feedback where to look. That means a person who makes mistakes, he's lucky. A person who doesn't make mistakes and succeeds, that person is lucky. Let me tell you why. Because sometimes you need the mistakes so you can be able to relocate or locate the solution. I believe that in this era, in 2019, where political correctness has become an incredible factor for what some call the intellectual web, okay? And this intellectual web is like intellectual social media and net, where it's for the first time people are finding knowledge valuable, not just in an organized institution, but from the screen that they hold in their hand. For the first time, knowledge can come to you through the creation of the internet. And it's like, once you follow this idea that everybody knows something you don't, you find the scholar's humility. That's when you begin honoring the craft or the art form. You see, and so I'm telling, Mr. Within is telling you, just like that martial artist, or any sort of artist who was mastering their art form, I want you to start mastering your intelligence. And what that means is, the first rule, honestly, is that you stop having unnecessary images to you. Any image of yourself that does not serve you, it could be images of failure. Acknowledge it. Think of, like, as if it's a photo album, this memory of your failure. Look at it, see what you did, wonder, study your memories. Okay? You can do this eyes open or eyes closed. Study your memories, understand the design that image was trying to communicate to you, and then just continue. Eventually you will see, in endless concentration and a sort of single pointedness to the craft and art, it's as if that disciple of that martial art master was robotically doing the moves, until suddenly, in the wilderness of an actual situation, all the techniques came into a rhythm. They came into an alignment. Okay, and so mastery is about experiential maintenance, about how many times you experience the thing. That means, like, I'll tell you this awesome Shaolin monk story. Uh, this Shaolin monk story is, you can say, it's by far one of the most profound stories of how far endurance can take one. No man can become a master until he has seen the end of the world, of the craft, and the beginning. You know, you pretty much live a life during your life, it through a sort of concentrated attention to a certain mastery or value projection. It's as if your mind gets good at your interests because you're continuing them. As you continue what you're interested in, it's as if like sometimes your interests are ways nature is trying to communicate to you. Nature is trying to remind you who you are. Sometimes your interests are methods of escapism because you don't want to confront the direct experience of the moment. Anyways, the Shaolin story goes that back in the day in this Shaolin town in Shaolinville, um, or let me say it like this. This kid goes to his father back in the day and says, Father, our ancestry has been a lineage of, let's say, carpenters. Okay? And the father looks at the son, it's like, okay, son. And the son says, our lineage has been just carpenters. I want to go be a Shaolin monk. Please give me permission. And the father's like, holy shit, this kid wants to be Shaolin monk. Okay, that's pretty cool, you know? So the father, in some sense, says, okay, son, you know, and takes the son there. And the moment the son enters like that Shaolin kind of headquarters or whatever, you know, that Shaolin monk temple, the moment the kid sees there, he sees like the main guy, the guru or the headmaster or whatever, walk by, and so he went in instantly bows and asks to be a part of the monk school, and the father's there watching. And so, in some sense, the kid is accepted, and the master and the guru looks at the father, and they both look at each other, and there's this incredible code of conduct in that culture. Sort of honor had an incredible virtue. This is why, the Japanese language, the way it was kind of it came into place, I feel it holds within it a unique structure of consciousness. That means a unique way. Like somebody who can speak Japanese is tapping into a very unique. Anyways, that's something else. But anyways, so the father acknowledges the guru, the Shaolin headmaster or whatever. And so what happens is the father goes back and he sees his son and he sees the enthusiasm and inspiration of his son and he just accepts the moment and he returns. Now many years pass. Okay, the son comes back home. Okay, and the father suddenly sees, whoa, his son is all grown up, dressed like a Shaolin monk, and just has the Shaolin monk presence. And what happens is they're all sitting at the dinner table, but this kid is nervous, as if like he looks like a legit Shaolin monk, but he's nervous. He has this tension. Okay? And so this is where I'm going to give you a backstory of what happened in the temple since the kid was there. Okay, so imagine now he's come back. He's sitting at the dinner table with all his family. His father's like, son, sit at the top of the table, not top at the, front of the table. And so it's the family's gathered, all the brothers and sisters, and they're there. And so now just pause that. I'm going to tell you what happened to the kid. So the kid goes to the Shaolin monk after the father leaves and goes there and does a few things for a while, is engaged with activities. As others, suddenly the teacher, the Shaolin monk teacher, like the headmaster, suddenly sees this kid and gives him a strange task and says, you have to do a unique training compared to all the others. And so this kid says, what do you mean? And the guy takes this kid into a room and gives him a bucket of water and tells him that with your palm, slap the water. Slap the water as if you're hitting the water with your palm. Do this endlessly. Okay? And the kid is kind of shocked and he's like, you want me to slap water? And the teacher's like, yeah, you have to do this. And so the kid goes on for many years, just not for many years, but for a very long time, just doing this. You can say even years, Okay, just every day, all the other kids are learning different Shaolin techniques, and he's just slapping water endlessly, day after day, water, you know. And so what happens is now he's come back home, and now we go back to the dinner table. Okay, he's sitting there with his father, this kid who's only slapped water in the Shaolin school, you know, and he comes there, and the father just looks at the whole family and says, you know, my son has come back, you know. And he looks at his son and he says, son, now tell me what happened. Like, what was the Shaolin experience? Like, you know, spill the beans of the Shaolin way of living, you know. And pretty much the son is there. Suddenly, he looks at his father and he sees he can't lie. You know, he loves his family that much that he doesn't want to disturb them by being an artificial person in front of them. So in some sense, he says, he gets angry. He gets up and he hits the table. He slaps the table and he says, I did nothing, you know? And he's like, right before he's about to even say it, let's make the story like that. Right before he's about to say it, you know, he just gets angry and he's actually, here, I'll say it like this. He says, uh, the son gets up in rage, hits the table, and says, I didn't do anything there. Okay? And when the son says this, he doesn't realize, but he sees the family and the everybody there shocked, because they were carpenters and they had this really gigantic family table, like this really big table, and this guy in his anger, just with one slap, he broke the table, like ridiculously broke the table, right? And that's when the father was like, wow, son, okay, you're like next level Shaolin ability kind of person now, you know? And so that was the notion. That was the sort of endurance, that what I'm trying to talk about, how to handle your life in a sort of masterful way, not to just only focus on one thing, but to do pay attention and concentrate on a sort of not just objective to life, but to actually the thoughts you're having. You see, we are watchers. We are void watchers of a manifest filled world. It is it's kind of incredible. It's as if our eyes have opened in empty space. And so we're now wondering, are the eyes from what's in the space, or are our eyes the space? If we conclude our eyes are the space, that's just like how in the European Enlightenment, just like how Michelangelo drew on the Sistine Chapel the finger of God and the finger of man, like he drew it with a space in between, but now they touch. What that means is Meister Eckhart has the saying where he says, the same eyes I see God are the same eyes God sees me. That means the vision, that means the macrocosmic truth of one's collective unconscious becomes the same microcosmic truth for, let's say, one's, in some sense, individual unconscious, personal unconscious. These are ways that Carl Jung divided. I was getting into it in the previous part one. There's many ways human beings have classified the mind. You know, I could just write an endless list of different ways I've heard it. Some people think they're just body. You know, body led to unknown mind. Known body led to unknown mind. So, you know, I heard the notion of a body, mind, and soul. Okay, I remember when I was a kid, it was fascinating because I was introduced to the idea of, in some sense, having a mind that is, in some sense, also my soul, right? So I had this notion when I was young, okay, but I didn't have any idea on the soul, and I didn't have even that much. Like, I was really young, right? Like, I'm talking about when I was like younger than 10. And I remember, like, it was one of those situations where a young child trusts life too much to doubt it. Like Rene Descartes, as he became older, it became more meaningful to doubt life. Okay, but life actually is not. You can't have one strategy to all of life. Okay, if you want to just be like, the thing about logic is that it doesn't consider future potential because it has to abide by past pattern of certainty. For me, trust me, we're all artists. We don't realize it. We are a planet of artists. That means the ape evolved into an artist. And what that means is we're all drawing the values of our moment. The similar freedom, the similar freedom that an artist has, or a calligrapher in moving the brush on the papers, the same freedom your free will has in choosing thought and meaning and subjective value and how to respond. You see, when you say you have to respond to a situation, that means you have not seen the situation yet. Okay, and most people are trying to find strategies towards success that are response based. Okay, so how would I say this? Let me change the atmosphere a bit. I want to tell you the Zen story about right and wrong, and it's a very interesting story. That and how the just give me a second. Let me see how the story go. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the story is pretty much the Zen master back in the day who had a bunch of disciples, and they lived in some sort of community setting. Now, what happens is that one of the disciples starts stealing stuff, so he gets caught once. They come to the master and say, "This dude's stealing stuff in like the temple and monastery," and then the Zen master is like, "Let him be." Okay, and then suddenly it happens again. It happens again, right? And the master keeps rejecting the idea of getting rid of this disciple. Eventually, all the students get together and they write a petition and they say, "If you don't get rid of this disciple, we will all leave." And they're in some sense kind of trying to like uh, push the Zen master to, in some sense, like just get rid of this guy. The Zen master looks at them and just there's this deep moment of silence. The Zen master says, "You, my disciples, are all so wise that you know right and wrong. You know, you can tell right from wrong. But this poor soul cannot even tell right from wrong. And it will defeat my purpose if, in some sense, he says, this student, this soul who doesn't know right from wrong needs more. He doesn't even know that he needs more attention, and he tells all of them, it doesn't matter if all of you leave, I will stay with him as my disciple. You guys can all leave." This sort of chaotic response to the disciples. In that moment, the disciples crack down into tears because they begin to understand that greater aspects of your intelligence open up to you when you care for life, when you actually care for it, regardless of the shape. Just the fact that there's another breathing creature, do not disturb it, allow it to advance. Pretty much what's the greatest way that a sort of a lot of our civilization's social friction can in some sense be smoothened out in some sense is that you're going to recognize this notion that the ancient just pretty much certain spiritual people have, that there's spirit guides and there's sort of communications coming from the void to them. This notion, I want you to just imagine it being a social duty where every person is helping everyone the moment they can. That's it. Okay? And so, what that means is you find yourself in a society where if there is a great idea, it will have enough sort of nourishment to continue. So what I'm telling you is that it's all behavior, and behavior is between a sort of how an object that thinks it's subjectively kept looks at another object and thinks how that being is subjectively kept, eventually to come to realize that we are left with our own eyes. And you don't understand how much serenity, bliss, like there's this mystical sense of bliss, they call it Satchid Ananda, which means conscious existence is bliss. This is in the Vedanta tradition, okay, in in Vedic culture. And this Satchidananda meant that the moment you recognize there is an awareness that is aware, it's conscious of existence, and there is just this direct experiential acceptance of this, then you are in a bliss because you have understood what the projector, and you're not lost in the screen. If one of those old school projectors on the wall, it's like you don't think what's on the screen is the projector. The light in our eyes stops being the ideas that we think we are. And I feel a person, it's kind of like this. You pretty much fall as a drop on some leaf. This drop eventually finds a stream. Eventually the stream finds a river. This river goes through a waterfall, a complete cultural angle shift. Okay? And eventually it reaches the ocean. And so what that means is you live a life where before you even think of people's personality, like that whole Western movie sacrifice thing where the guy's like, okay, I will give my life for this, like that's great, but you begin to see that sometimes it's not external sacrifice that is necessary. It is a sort of internal sacrifice prior to the mistake. You begin to recognize that the level of your intelligence is dictated by you. And if you are dictating your own values as an entity, then what is it, like you just wonder, can you shape your intelligence in language? Can you clothe your intelligence in the language? Are your clothes you? Your clothing is not you. The language is not the mind, yet the mind finds expression through language and image and their chronological coagulation. That means the mind is a very playful place. That's why in ancient traditions they called it the monkey mind. The monkey mind meant the mind just constantly moves. That means if you honestly took meditation seriously, you would immediately realize when you sit down still and silent after a while, if you are impatient in the first 10 minutes, if you get bored and boredom causes you to stand up from your meditation, there's two things. You have not understood why you're meditating. And two, it's that you have not continued, and without continuation, nothing can be achieved. That's it. What Just keep your attention, keep your eye on the ball, and move forward. That is. There's no greater lesson to a big creature in a changing world. Attain your objective biological and kind of evolutionary instincts, at the same time recognize how your instincts are intersecting with how your imaginative sense of subjective existence feels the world as being a world to it. Language, honestly, is that technology, is one of the first inner technologies. you know it's an evolutionary stage. Language, like most kids don't understand the value of language. Especially Western countries, they don't understand the value of being able to speak a second language. It means there's another parallel kind of, there's another world that your thoughts can move in. Okay, this is the power of studying language, but depends on your taste too. The greatest teacher will eventually, the greatest known teacher will eventually look at the student and be like, okay, I taught you everything, now life is your next teacher. And I was never your teacher. Life has been teaching you from the beginning of your existence. I am just, how can I say it? Uh, a graceful breeze in spring. There's a quote that there seems to be a quote from Einstein, Albert Einstein, where he says, a human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. Okay, I kind of feel this is not an Albert Einstein quote. I've heard his other quotes, and I don't think he speaks like this. But it's a good quote, anyways. There's a very interesting quote. Believe it or not, I just found it right now. It's from Leonardo DiCaprio, where he says, "Protecting our future on this planet depends on the conscious evolution of our species." Um, yeah, Charles Darwin has this quote where he says, "It is, of course, it's a common one." He says, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." Charles Darwin, 1809. And I guess what Mr. Within would say to Charles Darwin is that yes, but also the one who's most responsive to a sort of inner subjective change. Because for the first time, our free will is an ability to be a different individual. That means the moment your mind crafted you out of, like, think of it this way. It's like one reaches a sort of self-awareness where they see their self-awareness like somebody grabbing like a fistful of sand on a beach that is just vast and endless. Okay? And what that means is you have taken certain data from the world and you have processed yourself into an individual. Okay? So, what you realize in observing this, when the awareness of the self returns, like you're functioning primarily as an objective, a subjective bound self, but eventually this can go into uh, a sort of awareness of the self. So the self evolves into awareness. So this awareness becomes where the meaning and inspirations of life come from, and it's pretty much how your imagination is like you can see over a certain wall of this dimension another mode of, let's say, cosmic simulation. A unique idea that I have, which I believe it or not, I think this is the first time I'm sharing it, is this notion. First time I'm sharing it, and I'm talking about it in public. But I've kind of written about this, especially in my poetry. That for me, there was a time where I was sitting on a chair, like in my living room. And for a second, I wondered about why some people call knowledge as a tree. Like there's the idea of tree of knowledge. This idea was there before I was born, like this sort of profound esoteric idea of the tree of knowledge, which is pretty much means looking through God's eyes. Okay. And so this tree of life, I wondered why even that we say different branches of science, different branches of philosophy, different branches, like different branches of this tree of education we have, especially in universities, we even use the word branch. So I wondered about a sort of, I was just sitting there in my living room, just on this chair, and suddenly my mind, I imagined as if from the top of my head, my hair, as if endlessly extending like roots into the sky, you know? And I kind of felt like this sort of very unique notion of how the mind that I've been conceiving to have only the awareness of the individual, actually, the sense of self is individual, but the awareness is unchanging. That means behind my eyes and your eyes, and every other living being's eyes, trust me, we all acknowledge a common void. Emptiness doesn't have to be explained. But fulfillment of life has many explanations. I want to read some quotes from Charles Darwin, and I have this thing in these YouTube videos where I say it's a quote tunnel. I just read one by one his quotes, and I sometimes give commentary. So a little about Charles Darwin. Robert Darwin is his full name. He was an English naturalist, geologist, and biologist, best known for his contributions to the science of evolution. His proposition that all species of life have descended over time from common ancestors is now widely accepted and considered a foundational concept in science. So that's a bit of Wikipedia for you. So he's a naturalist. He has studied nature. Charles Darwin says, a man's friendships are one of the best measures of his worth. Pretty much how honest a man is with his world. He says a man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. It is those who know little and not those who know much who so positively assert that this or that problem will never be solved by science. Charles Darwin says, I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. Charles Darwin says, the mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I, for one, must be content to remain an agnostic. Charles Darwin says the highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. Exactly. That's like my point with the title, right? So Charles Darwin was I guess he was Darwining, like, remember that Charlie Sheen thing, like. Anyways, he says animals whom we have made our slaves, we do not like to consider our equal. And this is a very true concept. Anybody you've been rude to, you will not consider them equal to you. Anybody you've hurt or thrown something negative at, you would not, you will never value them the same. This one's interesting. Charles Darwin says, I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created parasitic wasps with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of cadavers. Okay, Jesus Christ. Calm down, Charles Darwin. Okay, this is incredible. He says, Charles Darwin says, the very essence of instinct is that it's followed independently of reason. Again, this is a way where your reason is, or in some sense, owned by your subjective identity in the moment. Okay, your reasoning in the moment is a thought of you. Okay, so this thought of you is not. It's as new as this moment is. Sometimes when I say these words, this is why I realized, like, whenever especially somebody wants to communicate, you got to understand communication eventually accelerates into a rhythm, similar to like an athlete with a purpose in mind when they're playing soccer or football. The person has a sort of intention, sort of alignment. It's as if soccer players, when they play with one another, the true, real, talented soccer players, they're just looking at each other's skill. They're on a skill level, not on a competition level. They are just mastering their skill. Okay, but there are some who are in a competition mode and they lack. That means you choose how many distractions limit your speed towards your clarity. Charles Darwin has this interesting quote where he says, "On the ordinary view of each species having been independently created, we gain no scientific explanation." He says, how paramount the future is to the present when one is surrounded by children. He says man is descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped, probably arboreal in its habits. Okay, pretty much a complex way of explaining the chimp. Or this is something where I feel if Richard Dawkins was listening to my talk right now, he'd probably like. It says to kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than, the establishing of a new truth of fact. Yeah, sometimes getting rid of the chaos is easier, not easier, but another way compared to bringing a new order, and not an order of one mind, but a collective initiative. Um, he has this quote, Charles Darwin, where he says, "We must, however, acknowledge, as it seems to me, that man, with all his noble qualities, still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin." This one's good. Another quote I'm going to say probably here I'll say it. He says, "I have called this principle by which each slight variation, if useful, is preserved by the term of natural selection." So just the preserved slight, the use, like the preservation of the useful slight variations in nature. He calls on the term of natural selection. Charles Darwin says, "If the misery of the poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institutions, great is our sin." Yeah, if society is bothering you, then you have not only nature's problems to deal with, but society is as well. So eventually there would come a calling of each individual member of the species to bring about a strength that they feel they never had. What that means is you're going to start living for your world, and you're going to be directed by your own authentic intelligence. For the first time, you got to understand the value that most people, especially children, are conditioned into having role models, idols. Okay, most people in this new age community are like children. They're looking for some, authority figure that knows more. For me, it's not that about that. It's like the artist approach is much more enlightened and free and liberating socially, because the artist is like kind of trying to bring the unknown, is pretty much uh, allowing the unknown to sculpt the known anew. So imagine after attaining a sort of perfect stability of your individuality. Like, let's let, like, for a second entertain the idea that we have achieved everything physically we wanted. Let's say right now you wanted to be a millionaire or a billionaire or whatever you wanted right now. Just for a second, let's consider you have all that stuff, and this is the moment after. Okay? After you've had everything, after you've seen paradise, this is the moment after of where you want to go. And so, this moment after our the paradise of our desires has been attained, this moment after that, we come into this state where we see, after you have controlled all those people who are desire, control, power bound creatures who want to just devour power, like just become more powerful and powerful, which in some sense become uh, inefficient um, voices for our species. Okay, the violent, those who seek power before wisdom. It's like the child wants to hold a gun in that he can't even hold properly, and and whew, my thoughts are moving too fast. Um, the mind is something that anything that suddenly is unknown that you don't know, be playful towards. Chaotic things happen, ordered things happen. Be playful in both. Playfulness means that you're allowing the decency of nature to be abided within your subconscious structure of thought. That means who you think you are is now okay with being what it is. Okay, when you reach that state, you reach a sort of complete purity, because there's no longer your vision of your your pure awareness is no longer obstructed by a shape, by a material shape. You stop obsessing over a temporary creature and wonder about the depths of your mind, because you have only one lifetime, objectively. For me, it's like, so I can tell you this. This is the ultimate truth. Nature has teachings, like when you just look at animal life, the grace of various ecosystems, you suddenly see there's a wisdom in their patterns of behavior, that to replace nature with technology and a kind of street like I think there should be a law banning streets being made, which is a crazy law. I'm probably going to write something in my science fiction novel about this. But like, I feel we should just stop. Um, we should embrace a natural environment. Pretty much the greatest notion I've heard is that certain futurists have thought that the greatest kind of society is one that is not doesn't have to just be there like some rock that withstands the forces of nature, but it becomes a sort of society, or like the foundation of like all the infrastructure of that society can lift and adjust to the natural shifts of the earth. As if there's an earthquake, the company building lifts off into the sky, you know, in some sense, like making sure the disaster is gone. So in some sense, we begin to see that the evolution of the static is dynamism. Anything that we have not brought life into with our attention, when we do, it gains it, we cultivate it. Your attention is like the samurai's blade, the samurai sword that you carry. How you hold this sword will suggest, what you pay attention to will suggest the direction of your life. And I'm telling you, this is why the whole thing's called Mr. Within, that in this life, you will go on for a majority of your life, just your attention on external phenomena. But find at least a few moments in this lifetime where you wander beyond, when you do not limit yourself from the beyond. As if, like, if you're a religious person, think of it as if this way God is saying, I have made all this for you, man. What are you going to do? Are you going to bask in the feast of existence? And in a good way, for example, the creator is saying this, in the sense that there's endless opportunities that if your mind could see, it would be in some sense its own enlightenment. And what that means is we see this. For example, you see a footage like of this kind of. I remember seeing this YouTube video where it showed human beings saving other people from, like, trains and cars and all different things, different hazards. And I began to see an ability of human beings to care for one another as if the other person had the same value as them. You see, this is where justice has to take this next level stand in society, where you protect what is decent, what is good intentioned. You do not disturb the good intention, because it has the greatest conscious contributive force to the civilization's advancement. Pretty much, you don't disturb an artist in drawing its artwork. And many people who are living honest, humble lives and going throughout the day and doing their work, there's many around the world. These people are like people trying to draw their life, trying to, in some sense, they're trying to see in how their footsteps design the road they walk on, how their free will becomes valued in the moment. How is it, how it's valued. Okay, guys. I don't know why, but intuitively, I feel usually at the end of these live streams to just hang around if anybody has a question or a thought they want to share. Um, it's kind of important what you value in life, because a lot of stuff is temporary. You can say depression and stress are like a person getting sad because something has died before them, something has been lost in their life before them. They are still physically existing, but the world that they see has changed too quick around them. And to be honest, you feel as old as your mind, in some sense, experiences time. For me, time and space They have been linear measurements of how I've seen change, how the physical world has changed. There have been a sort of linear kind of skeleton, a subjective skeleton for that, the notion of time. But I've looked at the word time and it has just been letters. I've looked at the word time and it has been the empty page behind the letters. And I've come to recognize that there's a sort of origination process. That means there isn't just the history of people on this planet, there's the history of what those people were paying attention to, which became the ideas that were preserved. So we have to, a part of civilization has to go into a compiler mode where they have to compile contributions and pretty much the many of the technologies that as I speak, it's not that people are just passing away. Many technologies are being lost. Many ways of efficiency are being lost because they're not being paid attention to. So we will go into the era of the social responsibility of creating compilations and in some sense keeping the content alive even though you cannot show all the content for each part of the compilation. So in some sense I'm saying it becomes this sort of need. A part of society will always be creating new things. A part of society will always be destroying whatever is there, and a part of society will always be maintaining the change. As these three modes are perceived, then the sort of law system changes. As if I remember like bringing up this idea in some science fiction content that I'm working on, this novel, and in it there's a reality where the governing system, where in some sense how the government and the judiciary, like how the law works in that country or in that part, and like how can I say it? It's like pretty much in my science fiction novel, the future government in the year 5025, of course, a playful science fiction novel, in it, in the year 5025, the governance of reality is done by an institution which is called the Enlightened Society, and it is called the Enlightened Society because this governing system is managing being the same government in some sense for for nine parallel dimensions of Earth. There's only 9 parallel dimensions of Earth here in this story. And so what happens is this enlightened society, it divide, like how would I say it? Like there's a concept where society is divided into these three modes, and this idea was inspired for me from just this what is it? These three Indian gods, which is Vishnu, Brahman, Shiva. Do you see? And it was these forces that these are like these kind of, they're not scientific laws, yet science can apply to them. They are universal laws where, again, as I mentioned before, a part of life is just coming out. Things are coming into existence, things are changing in existence, and then things are ending in existence. Do you see? And so as society becomes dictated this way, the whole law system is based on the three roles that the person takes. Children are in the changing kind of law system. People who are in some sense contributing to the society, they're in the sort of innovation kind of way of being judged. They're judged based on not just their actions, based on their contributions. And not just financial contributions, like it's very fascinating. Sometimes I've had visions on not just like a moment of like a person or something, but I've had a vision of civilization, various visions of how civilization is going to happen in the future. And these visions, in some sense, came into the potential of the decision making and how much the world is going to change. That means you can't predict the future because you couldn't even, like, how can I say it? It's like the unknown is everywhere. But you can throw that sphere of knowledge into an unknown sky, you know? Just like how Carl Sagan wrote this message that's on the satellite, where I forget the name of the satellite, but the satellite has recently left our solar system. And if there is this notion that they're from another galaxy, our neighbors perceive us, the light from our galaxy that hits them, they will see 200 millions before us. They will see like a photo of us from 200 million years ago, based on how light travels. But that's depending on how the light is assimilated, because one can say light has a sort of memory. Every light beam that hits with it, we think it's just this kind of like non-physical thing. But I feel the light beam is an energetic sort of movement. And as an energetic movement, eventually it takes form. So the moment the light reflects from anything, it has an imprint of what it touched. Okay, and so this intelligence echoes, and so based on various light beams, we are, believe it or not, this is a very unique kind of mystical thing, I'm going to say, where you begin to notice that there's many waves hitting you throughout the day. Your mind has a sort of waving effect. Okay, and when you understand this, the main reason of this waving is because of our biological design. And what that means is our biological design is a breathing mechanism. Exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. You see, so it's like this thing where we are constantly shifting. The heart is beating. And so this sort of vibration that occurs from this our biological design makes the mind echo. Now, as the mind echoes, thoughts are constantly. Our thoughts are like when you have a thought. If you notice, it's like writing something on the sand of a beach and the water coming over the sand and slowly making it fade. When you try to remember a list of stuff, unless you commit that list of imagery to some sort of abstract part of your long-term memory, it will fade like that kind of waving effect of like the waves of the water wiping what was written on the sand eventually. So whatever you don't put your attention on, whatever you do not maintain or cultivate, you lose. So think of it this way: every day that you wake up, your emotions, your thoughts, or whatever you feel about the day, or whatever way that the story of your day was, think of it this way: as things you're holding in your hand, but at the end of the day, you can only take a few of these, and maybe even not at all. And you wake up and suddenly it's a new day and you're a new person again. Sometimes we are like, let me tell you how multidimensionally profound beings we are, because there is this sort of individual objective concept. We think we're just one person, okay, but we are judging ourselves based on many contexts, like what did I do to that person, how is God gonna treat me, oh my God, what's the consequences of that nuclear bomb, and all these various ways of thought. Okay, it's very profound, because eventually, whenever one starts talking about nature, they cannot avoid a sort of reverse engineered integrativeness, as if like somebody asks someone, what's the truth of the world, and the guy's like, it's too simple to talk about. It's too simple to say. That's pretty much Zen at its peak, where language is no longer necessary. That means for the first time, this internal awareness of the being, this pilot of consciousness that the person is, you're piloting your consciousness. The free will is navigating your attention as the moment. Okay, now this free will is being the attention, and attention on thought is being what the free will thinks it is. So think of it this way: just like how you can pick an object right now in front of you up, like you could just, let's say there's a glass of water, you get that glass of water, drink it. Okay, so similarly, just like how you could touch an object and pick it up, your mind begins to suddenly have these uh, bursts of explorative, deep interest in certain phenomena. It's as if your mind is waking up, like a giant waking up, like that's your intelligence. This is why you can't measure a person's intelligence, because we're not only rhythmic creatures, but we are also creatures that our free will has a lot to do. Our future is how we feel we are a person now. It's based on that. The decisions are like now. Do you understand like the importance that free will only exists now? It doesn't exist in the future. It doesn't exist in the past. The past is past. You have no free will there. You know, you know. Even some gurus have, like Papaji said, the past is a graveyard. And the future, it hasn't come. Oh my God, like how long are we going to wait for the future? It'll never come. You see? So the future is like, out of the picture because it'll never show up to the party. And so we are left with our present moment. And this is where the rawness of your intelligence is truly revealed to you when you actually realize you're no longer a creature of thought. You're a creature of direct presence and experience. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. The conscious evolutionary opportunity. It's pretty much how this 4 billion-year-old science project has finally found a way to separate itself from nature and eventually return. There's no other way. We either try to return nature or we will run away from it into technological simulations and boxes, and virtual reality will become more important than actual living life with people. There's many blunders that await, but there's also many ways that great ideas will open their eyes for the first time on this planet and they will charge as a solution. The only thing that is important for children to know, regardless, if a child is born right now in 2019 and they don't do anything, like they don't care about anything, the planet or their civilization or why humanity has continued so far, like they don't care, imagine, right? It's one of those situations that the only thing the child needs to see, the child's eyes needs to get exposed. How would I say it? Like the child needs to see there are other warriors on the battlefield fighting. That's it. It doesn't like it's the choice of the child where it goes. Okay? But it is also that choice is arising from data. And if children are born and they see, okay, like I'll do my own thing, I'll go follow my desires, like a trail of, you know, cookie crumbs or something, like you how would I say it? It's like it's kind of like you see your comrade in the battlefield fighting alone, and you're like, the spirit of honor moves the blade. The value of the moment suggests the confrontation of the intensity. The will to win is nature's greatest uh, harmony with itself. You stop being a dualistic creature. Your mind finds peace in every moment, pretty much. But you can entertain any sort of duality as well. So I'm telling you, don't think like we can't become our imagination because our body is rooted in reality. So the imagination will always feel a simulation. So for the end of our lives as people, we will look at our thoughts and feel like they were just dreams. They were never there really, but they were something. Some design was there of the thought. So of course there's many ways of this classification of objective and subjective phenomena, but the actual clarity, it comes from a sort of remembrance of a universal responsibility as a universal intelligence. You no longer resist the world. You no longer fight with it. You're like you just you recognize the value of nature's pace. Eventually, once you go into that non-dualistic state of mind where your presence has become the space where your personality exists, welcome to Satchidananda. The mind is free before the concept of mind was ever needed. Much blessings and namaste.